and gentlemen, if you'll take your seats, please. Please take your seats. We'll be underway. We've got a lot of good friends in the room and a lot of good conversations, but we're going to get our program started. Welcome. My name is Henry Cisneros, and I've had the privilege of being a board member of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, Texas Division, for a number of years. It is my pleasure to be asked to welcome you to this event. The U.S. Global Leadership Coalition is a national effort to focus on development and diplomacy, all of the dimensions of international affairs short of the military aspects. And the idea is to try to create support, knowledge across the country in communities. The coalition is active in 34 states. It has chapters in 34 states and works in the remainder of the states via the chapters in those states. The Texas chapter has 300 members in the major cities of Texas, and we're very, very, very pleased with this kind of turnout in San Antonio. Let's hear it for San Antonio and U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. It's my pleasure to introduce just a number of the people who you will meet over the course of the day, but the leader of the Texas effort is Kirsten Kellenberg. She'll follow me here at the podium, but Kirsten, please stand and let us recognize you. Kirsten Kellenberg. And we're honored to have with us Congressman Joaquin Castro. He is not only the congressman from the 20th Congressional District, but his assignments in Washington include a membership on the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Intelligence Committee, and he is co-chair of the U.S.-Japan Caucus in the United States House of Representatives. So his background is deep in international affairs, and he will bring major insight into today's conference. Congressman, thank you very much for your presence. Also, we're graced to have today two ambassadors, Ambassador Luis Moreno, who was the ambassador to Jamaica, and Ambassador O.P. Garza, who was ambassador to Costa Rica, correct? Nicaragua. Please stand, gentlemen, and let us recognize the both of you. And also, Vice Admiral Searing is on one of the panels in a bit. You'll hear from him. But the Admiral had responsibility in his days in the United States Navy for all missile operations in the Navy. When you think of it, the United States Navy has missiles aboard submarines, missiles aboard ships, land-based missiles, defense against incoming missiles. So we have a person who truly understands the national security dimension of the international state, Vice Admiral Searing. Well, this conference is particularly important because of the times in which we live, and it is clearly an objective of U.S. international relations to focus on stability in our international affairs, reliability, values and ideals, a sense of mutual respect, and we're used to American leadership. All of these issues are timely at this point, and so an entity like this focused on informing the public. We've always believed as a society that in part our international affairs, our international relations are best derived from a deep understanding on the part of the American public. The American public needs to understand in order to empower our national officials in an unstable and difficult world environment. Let me just give you a couple of reasons why an entity like this is important and why we're so happy to welcome them here today. First of all, America's role in the world is important. and has always been important. From the earliest beginnings of the United States, we relied on relationships in other parts of the world, even to become a nation. In the American Revolution, the relationship with the French was very important. We wouldn't have won the Battle of Yorktown without the naval blockade that made it possible for the revolutionary troops to beat British and end the Revolutionary War. During the period of expansion to the American West, perhaps the greatest single act of adding territory to the United States was the transaction with the French to get the Louisiana Purchase that opened up most of what we now know of from New Orleans to the mid part of the country. And of course, relationships with Mexico over a long span of time and international affairs played an important part even in our Civil War. After the Civil War, Teddy Roosevelt spoke succinctly about the nature of our international affairs in his phrase, "Speak softly, but carry a big stick." And the United States established its presence in the world. Through that period, the country was industrializing and urbanizing and becoming an agricultural force and basically tending to our own business. But then the advent of World War I required America's coming into the war. We went into the war as an important country. We came out of the war as a nation that the world recognized as the predominant military and economic power in the world. Many experts have dated from that period, the years after World War I, the important emergence of the United States. But it's also true that we failed to create the League of Nations that President Wilson wanted, and we tended to focus on our own problems as part of a worldwide depression. And part of the reaction was a level of isolationism that the country had not seen before. It took the onset of World War II, Hitler invading Eastern Europe and Russia, and the danger of Hitler's invasion of Great Britain that led Winston Churchill to forge an alliance with President Roosevelt that began as a lend-lease and ended up with the great might, what President Roosevelt called the arsenal of democracy, the industrial power of the United States, the building of tanks and machinery and ships, the Kaiser ships, the Detroit-based automotive sector turned to that arsenal of democracy. And at the end of the war, there was no doubt the United States was the most important force for world peace, for unification, for mediation. Unfortunately, the result was a Cold War that required an understanding on the part of the American people. We had close experiences with disaster, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Berlin Crisis, the war in Korea, and other things. But what emerged at the end of the Cold War, when it appeared that the Russian power was spent and the United States was alone atop a pinnacle of international affairs, came a recognition of a more multipolar world, including the rise of China. All of these things sound foreign and distant, both in time and in geography, but in truth, they affect our economy, they affect our jobs, they affect the movement of people in immigration settings, they affect directly the quality of life of the American people. So though we tend to separate domestic affairs from international affairs, they simply can't be separated that easily. And it's important for leaders in the major cities of our country, such as you gathered today, to understand this ebb and flow of dynamics and our role. People say all politics is local, and we know that to be true, and international affairs is local too. And I want to cite just two instances in our own city. One is our relationship with Mexico. San Antonio has had a long relationship with Mexico, obviously. We were once part of Mexico geographically. But in the intervening years, it's been our principal trading partner because of NAFTA and the succeeding agreement. We see our freeways clogged with traffic moving product from Mexico into the United States. We are now part of an automotive cluster that reaches from Tesla in Austin and Toyota here and Navistar here and JCB here to 400,000 jobs in northern Mexico, from León and Querétaro and Monterrey and Saltillo and Torreón off to Baja California. So our relationship with Mexico is more important than just leaving it to the ebb and flow of national politics. We have a stake as a city, and our city has been very foresighted, I believe, and aggressive in terms of maintaining its own international set of relationships that have impacted our economic development. The other is our relationship with Japan. As a result of a steady, long-term relationship with Japan, which led the congressman to his role on the, as co-chair of the Japan caucus, we have the largest automotive plant in the world by geography, by physical size, that produces 240,000 Tundras and Sequoia trucks every year, about an average of one per minute over the course of the year, and provides incomes, good incomes, not only for the workers at the plant, but some 21 supplier firms that exist around it. International relations with Japan is important to us. So with all of this as background, it makes the case for why San Antonio should be involved in the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, why it's important to Texas, and why it's important across the nation that leaders, people like you in cities all across America, are paying attention to international affairs. We have to speak up. We have to make our understanding known on a broader basis. We have to share information with others in our communities. This is not a subject we can be silent about or oblivious to. It's part and parcel of how our communities advance and certainly how our country advances. So with that by way of introduction, it's my pleasure to introduce Kirsten Cullenberg. Please join me in welcoming Kirsten.
Wow. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. I'd like to invite everyone to please start eating your lunches and continue. Don't feel self-conscious about the fork noise. I can talk through it. I can talk over it. So thank you very much, Secretary Cisneros. I'm Kirsten Cullenberg, Texas Outreach Director for the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, and it is so great to be here in San Antonio. I think my favorite city in the state, but please don't tell the others. In no small part due to the friendly people here. And before I begin, I'd like to give a massive shout out to the members of USGLC's Texas Advisory Committee here in the room. You just heard from our state co-chair, Secretary Cisneros, but I'd like to invite the other members of our Texas Advisory Committee here with us today to stand. Now, please take a stand. Now, take a look around the room at your friends and your neighbors who are already involved with us. Truly, some of my dear, dear friends, thank you very much. This would not have been possible without your commitment, guidance, and dedication, so thank you. And of course, thank you to all of our guests of honor today, including the Congressman, Admiral Searing, and Ambassador Moreno, who we'll hear from in just a few minutes. Now, I know you didn't come today to hear me, but I'll try and keep it brief, and I want to tell you a little bit about who we are. For 30 years, the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, or USGLC, has brought together a nationwide, bipartisan coalition of political, military, civic, business, and faith-based leaders to make the case for robust, sustained American engagement in the world, showcasing that cost-effective investments in development and diplomacy alongside defense and national security, help build a better and stronger America. We're led by a National Advisory Council chaired by Admiral Mike Mullen, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, that includes former secretaries of state, defense, and treasury from both sides of the aisle, our nation's leading foreign policy and national security expertise. Admiral Mullen, along with the rest of USGLC's growing military community, understands better than most why it's far cheaper to prevent war than to fight in one. I know that message rings especially heavy here in San Antonio, Military City, USA. And that's why our National Security Advisory Council includes nearly 270 of our nation's most respected retired 3- and 4-star generals and flag officers, including Admiral Searing on our panel today, and Generals Mark Eidegger and Anthony Rock here in the audience. Thank you both for joining us. Yes, please. Thank you very much, Tim. USGLC's Veterans for Smart Power initiative is made up of over 30,000 veterans across the country who are committed to strengthening our non-kinetic security tools. I know that we have many veterans here with us today, and I encourage each of you to get involved with us, because what brings us all together is our shared recognition that America cannot afford to retreat from the world, especially now. Recent polling shows that the American people are worried about how global instability and threats from our rivals impact safety and prosperity here at home. Strategic investments in international assistance, which account for less than 1% of government spending, are crucial to protecting our national security, maintaining America's economic edge, and advancing the very best of American values globally. It's how we prevent terrorism, disease, and other threats from migrating to our shores, build partnerships, and reach new markets to outcompete our rivals like China, and improve stability across fragile states through delivery of food, medicine, and humanitarian aid. Less than 1% of the federal budget. And we do this not just because it's the right thing to do, which I truly believe that it is, but because it's the smart thing to do. San Antonio understands that when 95% of the world's consumers live outside of America's borders, we have to show up to compete. Our economy and our jobs depend on it. Last year alone, Texas exported over $444 billion in goods to overseas markets, supporting more than 20% of jobs in the state. So thank you for showing up today. Some of you may have gotten a cold email from me inviting you, which is great that you opened it, to say the least. For using your voice and your resources, your passions, to help build a better, safer world and a stronger, more prosperous America. And now it's my pleasure to invite my very, very dear friend and Texas Advisory Committee member, Armin Babrajanian, to introduce our featured guests today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? How's everybody doing? All right, good. Thank you all for being here. It's nice to see so many familiar faces, so many of our partners and our supporters. Thank you for being here. Kirsten, thank you so much for involving the World Affairs Council. Thanks to your national CEO, Liz Schreier, and to your USGLC team who are here on the ground for all the great work that you do nationally and also here in Texas. And what a special treat to have Secretary Cisneros here, who's been a longtime supporter of the World Affairs Council, our 2014 International Citizen of the Year, and more recently receiving the Order of the Rising Sun Award, the highest honor for Japan. So congratulations. I know many of our World Affairs Council young professionals are here, and they actively participate in the USGLC's Next Gen Global Leaders Network, a wonderful program that I encourage you to look at. And if you have any questions, you could obviously ask Kirsten, or you could ask Jan and Wayne, some of our young professionals from the council who are here. I'll take some time as a point of privilege to recognize, not only because they evaluate me, but my board of directors who are in the audience, ambassadors and board of directors, my team, Clarissa and Miranda, and our interns. If you could stand to be recognized. That includes you too, Ambassador Cragen. Ambassador Cragen's here too. Ladies and gentlemen, the world is a mess, right? To put it lightly. As you already know, the stakes for America's global leadership are higher more than ever. With a growing number of international crises and humanitarian conflicts, leading globally matters locally. And leading locally, as we do right here in San Antonio in Texas, it it certainly has an impact on an international impact. We need vital strategic investments in diplomacy and development and open new markets for goods and services, but that's not all. As someone deeply connected to San Antonio, I believe America's international leadership matters because what happens globally impacts us here. Organizations like AEM, SAMFCO know that. Our chambers of commerce and our small business leaders also know that. Whether it's through diplomacy, trade, or development, our engagement abroad straightens our economy, creates jobs, supports stability at home, and not to mention empathy for cultural diversity. San Antonio's diverse community and strong military presence reflect our global ties, and our city thrives when America leads with purpose, partnerships, and principles. Continued investment in diplomacy and development helps build a more secure and connected and prosperous future for San Antonians and those around the world. We see this in the work that we do at the World Affairs Council, the work that ambassadors have done and are doing, foreign service officers who are entrenched and doing all the work every day, and other organizations locally, the Global Engagement Office, Economic Development, organizations like Medical Bridges, the San Antonio Council for International Visitors, and the peace work being done by the Rotary Club. This is grassroots diplomacy at its best, and we are humbled to be part of that. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's featured speakers, who know the importance of America's global leadership. After the remarks from the congressman, Kirsten will come up and join us back on stage to moderate the discussion. First, joining our panel today is Ambassador Luis Moreno, who was mentioned earlier, a seasoned diplomat with substantial experience in the Western Hemisphere and the Middle East. He most recently served as U.S. Ambassador to Jamaica. He's also served in embassies all around the world, in Iraq, in Spain, Israel, Haiti, and if you get a chance today, ask him about him waiting for hours on end on the tarmac in Haiti, waiting for President Aristide. A remarkable story, that's just one of many. He's a member of the Foreign Service Grievance Board, although I think he retired recently from that position, and also the American Academy of Diplomacy, and happens to also serve on the World Affairs Council Board. Vice Admiral James Searing is a decorated veteran with over 32 years of service in the U.S. Navy. In his final post, he served as the director of the Defense Missile Agency. After his retirement, he served as Chief Administrative Officer and President of Property and Casualty Group at a small company called USAA. Thank you, Admiral, and Rhonda for joining us. It's now my great honor to introduce today's featured guest. The last event, if you remember, Congressman, we did with you was with Alice Albright and the focus of the MCC, and so much has changed since then, and that was just last year. Congressman Joaquin Castro, a San Antonio native, has proudly represented the city in the House of Representatives since 2013. He is a congressional leader in foreign policy and has served for many years on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and also on the House Intelligence Committee. Prior to joining Congress, he served as in the Texas House of Representatives, and that's where we first met when I was working for Big Brothers Big Sisters. He's also, like Secretary Cisneros, he's our 2015 International Citizen of the Year. He had to share it with someone who looks like him, but we really know you were the actual honoree, so thank you, Congressman. We are honored to have the Congressman Castro here today to talk about America's leadership around the world and how critical it is for economic prosperity and security right here in San Antonio. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Castro to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be with you all. I want to say first, thank you so much to Kirsten and everybody at the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, to Liz Schreier in Washington, and all of the incredible work that they're doing, especially right now. We owe you a deep debt of gratitude as do all Americans, for the work that you're doing in encouraging diplomacy and U.S. leadership in the world. Thank you all so much. And to my great friend and somebody that was actually a kindergarten classmate of my mom's, Little Flower, Henry Cisneros. Henry, thank you so much for being a North Star over the years. And just on a personal note, it was an incredible honor. You know, in 2013, I co-founded the U.S.-Japan Caucus, and I would not have gotten involved so deeply in that relationship had it not been for the example that Henry set when he was mayor in building a long-standing, wonderful relationship with Japan. So thank you. Congratulations on the Order of the Rising Sun. You absolutely deserve it. Congratulations, Henry. To Armin, of course, we met years and years ago. He's doing amazing work now, but did amazing work as the head of Big Brothers Big Sisters back then. Great to see you. Great to work with you again, Armin. And it's an honor to welcome all of you, of course, that are coming in from other places here to San Antonio. I believe the best city in the United States, and also an international city. And you know, I grew up. I know we should be happy about that, right? And before I forget, actually, because they did so much work to set this up, along with the organizations, thank you to my staff, to Jasmine and Sid Ravishankar and my other staff that are here, there in the back. I grew up, but not too far from here, probably about, 15 or 20 minutes on the west side of San Antonio, in neighborhoods that were about 95% or 90% Mexican-American, with parents that very much believed that when government works right, that it can create great opportunities in people's lives. And as a public servant, very proud to represent my hometown of San Antonio, I still fundamentally believe that. And that lesson has guided me through public service in Texas and in Congress, where I serve, as Henry mentioned, on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and on the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. For Texans, as you all know, foreign policy is not an abstract thing. We live it every single day. We are the nation's largest exporting state, and San Antonio businesses depend both on open markets and on reliable trading partners. We host Joint Base San Antonio, where service members prepare for missions across the globe. Our universities educate students from around the world. Every day, our state's prosperity and security are tied to America's global leadership, or lack of it. But today, our global leadership is very much being tested. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, China's growing influence, pandemics, climate-related disasters, the continuing war and humanitarian crisis in Gaza, all remind us that America cannot turn inward. The world looks to us for leadership and has for generations now. And when we pull back, others are ready to fill that void. That's why I'm deeply concerned about some of the directions that this administration has taken. I know that the politics in the room may vary, and I certainly respect that. So I want to speak less as a partisan and as somebody concerned with our nation and its standing in the world, and what that means for us and for the world. Over the past year, I believe that President Trump has hollowed out the very institutions, some of them, that make America strong. The State Department, USAID, and other agencies that defend our values abroad. He's imposed deep cuts to diplomacy and foreign assistance, even as we know these investments are a fraction of the federal budget, but deliver enormous returns for our security and our prosperity. We've also seen our allies, countries that have stood with us for generations, shaken by unpredictable decisions and sudden reversals. And what is happening, friends, is that the world is moving around us. They are forging alliances and bonds and relationships and trading agreements without us, and in many ways, leaving the United States behind. Whether it's tariffs announced without consultation or alliances questioned on a whim, these actions send a dangerous message that America may not always be reliable, and that uncertainty creates instability that hurts our businesses, our service members, and our standing in the world. Here in San Antonio, we felt the impact. Local businesses that depend on trade with Mexico and other partners have paid the price of tariffs imposed without strategy. For small manufacturers, it's meant canceled contracts and lost opportunities. For farmers and ranchers across Texas, it's meant instability in markets that they spent years building. I've been sincerely disappointed, to be quite honest, in some of my colleagues who have refused to assert Congress's jurisdiction over tariffs and appropriations, leaving families and communities here at home to bear the consequences. And let me be clear, diplomacy, development, and foreign assistance are not luxuries. They're vital tools of American leadership, and they are far less costly than war. Every dollar we invest in preventing crises abroad is a dollar we don't have to spend sending our young men and women into conflict around the world. And every partnership we strengthen overseas opens doors for Texas exports, creates jobs here at home, and helps build a safer and more stable world. In Congress, I've worked to make sure those principles guide our foreign policy. As you know, transnational criminal organizations, cartels, have significant influence and control in Mexico. This is a challenge that every Mexican government, for as long as I've been alive and before it, has struggled with. And do you know where these cartels get their weapons? The assault rifles and bulletproof vests that allow them to go toe-to-toe with the Mexican police and National Guard. They get them from the gun stores right here in Texas and other states in our nation. To stop this, I've authored legislation to combat the trafficking of U.S. firearms into Mexico and the Caribbean, because our neighbors' security is tied to our own. I've defended assistance programs that help countries like Colombia and Costa Rica integrate migrants and recovery from disaster, because when they succeed, the entire region, the Western Hemisphere, is more prosperous. And I've supported reforms that make USAID and the Development Finance Corporation more effective, because American taxpayers deserve accountability and impact. We are entering, and have entered, I would say, a period of incredible volatility. The question is whether America will retreat or whether we will choose to lead in a way that's principled and true to our values. I believe the choice is clear. In San Antonio, our city shows us what's at stake. Our businesses, our military families, and our universities all depend on America's engagement with the world. When we lead with humility, but with consistency, and most of all, with conviction, San Antonio wins, Texas wins, and America wins. Thank you all again for being here. Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Congressman. Truly, I couldn't have said it better myself.
No. You probably could have.
Well, fantastic. I want to just, before we get started here on the panel, you all have somewhere on your tables note cards and pens. Please, if you have thoughts throughout the program and would like to ask a question, that's how we'll be taking our Q&A today. And I have colleagues around the room who will come and collect them. So there will come a time for that, but please, if you have thoughts, please write them down, and we'll incorporate them to our Q&A at the end of this. Congressman Castro, I'd like to start with just setting the scene here. You come from a family deeply committed to public service. You and your brother have talked about following in your mother's example of political activism and dedication to this community, and it shows. And now you've served in Congress as a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, relevant to what we're talking about today, and one of the most established voices on Capitol Hill on U.S. global leadership. So I wonder if you'd be willing to share an experience from your life or career or travels that show you, that kind of brought you into this international affairs world to start.
No, well, thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on this panel. A few things. You know, I spent 10 years in the state legislature working mostly on domestic issues. State legislatures, obviously, the principal responsibility for foreign policy, international affairs is at the national level with Congress. But when I was in the legislature, I served on the Border and International Affairs Committee. that mostly for Texas meant our relationship with Mexico. But it was really the first thing that sparked my interest. And when I got to Congress, I had a little bit of a fork in the road where I had to make a decision. Was I going to continue doing a lot of the work that I had done in the legislature, which was on higher education? And I did continue a good bit of that work, but I also took the opportunity then to join the Foreign Affairs Committee. And my very first hearing in the Foreign Affairs Committee was Hillary Clinton testifying on Benghazi.
Oh.
Extremely long hearing. And you know, in Congress, if you look at it on C-SPAN, the most junior members are in the front row. So I was about 5 feet away from her in that first hearing, but it was remarkable. But in terms of my life, as I think about my continued interest on these things, well, it's so many things, but tariffs have obviously been on my mind and on the mind of so many folks because you see inflation continuing to rise. You know, I don't want to pick on any particular grocer, but you go to H-E-B or Walmart or Target or wherever you shop, or even if you shop online somewhere else, and you see the prices rising. And so, you know, my wife Anna and I, we have 3 young kids. We have a 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 3-year-old. And so one of us is in the grocery store usually several times a week, and sometimes that's me. There's an H-E-B down the block from my house. And here's the part about international affairs. So I go to the grocery store, and sometimes people will stop me. And recently, people have stopped me and said, these prices are getting too goddamn high. This woman told me, you know, she said, I'm not mad at you, but these prices are getting too goddamn high. Because prices moved up quickly, and, you know, even for essential items. So it was a reminder on very much in people's lives that they feel the policy decisions that are being made in Washington, and these are international decisions. To me, right now, that's the most striking one.
Fantastic. I mean, it's not fantastic. Rising prices we're all feeling it. I'm feeling it. So it's good to know that you're thinking about it in that way. I'd like to move to you, Ambassador Moreno. You've had an impressive and wide-ranging career in the U.S. Foreign Service, working to build relationships and partnerships and advance our interests. So from where you sit, can you talk about how you view America's leadership role in the world right now and how smart and effective investments in development and diplomacy truly do advance our interests from the diplomatic experience you have?
Right. What brings to mind to me is a quote by President Obama. He said, for big things going on, big initiatives, things which have global impact, the United States cannot do it without the rest of the world. And by the same token, the rest of the world cannot do it without the United States. I think that's really precise. Next thing I want to do is, to answer your question, is usually sometimes I ask people to close their eyes when I ask this, but I think people are still eating the dessert and that could end up being a bit of a disaster. But I want you to picture in your mind an empty frame. And in that frame, you have a crisp new $1 bill. And then at the bottom left-hand corner, a bright, shiny penny. And over to the side, a metal cutting scissor. And this is what we have on the line here. That $1 bill is the total U.S. government's fiscal budget for an entire year before 2025. And that one penny was the total amount of foreign assistance, including infrastructure, everyone at State Department's job, everyone at Voice of America's job, everyone USAID, all the programs we have going forward, 1 penny. And you take this like metal cutting scissor and cut that penny in half, you'd have what USAID was. That's what the budget was, less than 0.5%. And yes, I've seen this personally. I've seen it in Colombia, where I was working under the auspices of Ambassador Garza, who was a very tough boss, I might add. But when we did Plan Colombia, it wasn't just helicopter gunships and eradication aircraft. It was promoting government presence in some of the most difficult areas of Colombia, where the FARC was in fact the de facto government. I did it in Haiti, where we did feeding programs, where we did disaster response teams for hurricanes, for earthquakes, for all sorts of things. And it brought to mind what happened in Myanmar a few months ago when USAID was being phased out by the administration. And we sent a DART team to go on the ground almost immediately, and they were pulled because the funding was cut. And those guys who had left to go there had to be called back. And within 24 hours, the Chinese had teams in responding. And that's what we have at risk here. In Iraq, I worked with anti-corruption USAID programs.
Wow.
In Israel, on the West Bank, I worked with USAID officers on economic development. And during the years that I was there, these economic development programs that we did, I really feel on the West Bank really prevented a third intifada from happening. Yes, we worked in Gaza too, and we prevented things from happening right then. Unfortunately, the situation where we're in now, without having the influence on the ground, is really something. Just let me finish by summing up how our around the world we've been cut down. 85% of USAID programs are no longer in existence. In the Sudan, 8 million people at risk at starvation right now. The Ebola warning system, we had teams all over Uganda and all that part of Africa that were monitoring the Ebola outbreaks. And we helped a lot of people, but it also served as a warning for Ebola moving out of Africa to Europe and eventually to the United States. That's all gone. PEPFAR. PEPFAR is the HIV/AIDS program that has saved 26 million lives around everywhere.
And a Texas legacy for President Bush.
Yes, it's an incredible program. I witnessed my housekeeper in Haiti saved her life. I mean, I know a bunch of people who personally saved. And even in Europe, you know, I worked in Spain with USAID on combating violent extremism in Catalonia. And you know, we actually had police people from Los Angeles come in and set up soccer leagues for the incoming immigrants that were coming in from the Middle East. So all those things are important. And I'll close this section with what unfortunately, I walked into the foyer here and I saw what I was going to base my entire opening on was a particular quote that you guys blazed on the wall over there.
Say it in case anybody didn't see it.
And take it away. General Mad Dog Mattis, who I had the pleasure of being associated with when I was at CENTCOM, he said, if you don't fund the State Department fully, I'm going to have to spend a lot more money on ammunition. And that is true. And you mentioned, Congressman, about that $1 also you made reference to. For every dollar we spend, we save $16 in what response could possibly be.
Yeah.
So we can't do it without the rest of the world, and the rest of the world certainly can't do it without us. And that's what's in play right now.
Well, I think it's a fantastic time to bring Admiral Searing into this conversation on national security. During your 32-year career in the U.S. Navy, including as Director of Missile Defense of the Missile Defense Agency, you addressed some of our most complex national security challenges. How have you seen the role of U.S. civilian power, including economic development, humanitarian assistance, things like that, if you've seen it around the world, working alongside our defense posture to create a stronger U.S. national security?
Sure, thanks for the question. Just for context, I was the Missile Defense Agency Director for almost 6 years between 2012 and 2017. I was appointed by President Obama. I then served through the first part of the Trump administration as well. So totally bipartisan here, right? In terms of us in the military and who we serve. The Missile Defense Agency is the agency that was born out of the Ronald Reagan Strategic Defense Initiative. And that morphed into what's called MDA today. It's a big part of what's being talked about with Golden Dome as well. But my responsibility was to defend the U.S. and its allies from ballistic missile attack around the world. That was my mission and the mission of the agency. So we traveled around the world, and we would never travel without State Department, without the support of the civilian infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And you know, the military sometimes can be viewed as we're just going to go in and conquer the world, right? But those discussions always started with our State Department counterparts and a well-funded State Department organization. I'll give you one example in terms of how did that relationship really, you know, benefit us, and maybe it's something for you all to think about as we head to the future here about this strong relationship between the military and the civilian side. And talking to honorary members of the Japan award that you guys have received and been honored with. I'll just use Japan as the example, and the secretary, the congressman will know this. We, back in the early 2012, 2013 timeframe, and Ambassador, you probably know this as well, North Korea really began to escalate in terms of developing intercontinental ballistic missile capability. If you remember back then, we were very concerned about their ability to reach the United States with long-range missiles. And when I became the director, we looked at, okay, what do we have from a capability standpoint? We had radars in Alaska that would help, but we really needed an early detection capability to see the threat as it went ballistic, to cue our missile defense systems. So we said, well, we have to put a radar in Japan. And I remember talking to my State Department counterpart, it was Frank Rose at the time. He said, you want to do what? I said, we really need a tactical radar in Japan, and it needs to be in this general area. It's called Shiriki. He said, okay, and he went with me, and we went to talk to Ambassador Carolyn Kennedy at the time, and I told her what we wanted to do, and she said, you want to do what? With the picture of her dad above her shoulder. And I said, we need to do this for classified reasons, and they are the ones. It was easy for me to bring the radar and procure the radar and operate the radar and bring the military to do that. But it was really the civilian side of the government that carried the water, and us being able to do that in terms of meeting with the Japanese officials, meeting with the local officials. If you've been to Japan, you know how much they are passionate about their melons, like world-class melons in Japan.
Yum.
And when we held, local sessions with the locals through interpreters, they brought this up and they said, how is the radar going to affect our melons? And it was a valid concern, right? So what did we do with the help of the U.S. government? We relocated the melon fields to the opposite side of where the radar was pointed to North Korea. And to me, that was possible because of the relationships that we had forged with the country of Japan. And it wasn't, breaking new ground with the government officials. They, one, had strong allied relationships with us, but the government-to-government piece of this always laid the groundwork for what we were able to do militarily. So that's just a good example of how I saw this work together.
No, it's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. I think that now's a really good time for us to talk a little bit about Asia, since we're talking, we're there already. And I'll set the scene a little bit before I open it up. China is actively seeking to unseat the U.S. and as the world's leading superpower, including through its rapid military buildup and the infamous Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, in the last 15 years, China has increased its development investments around the world, including here in the Western Hemisphere, by more than 525%. In this moment, as we're retreating, they are advancing. So, Congressman, you've been a leading force in strengthening U.S. engagement in the Indo-Pacific. How should the U.S. continue to leverage its relationships in Asia as part of our long-term strategy, especially as it relates to China? And where do you see the greatest opportunities or gaps right now?
Oh, well, you're right. It is tough because the administration right now is pulling back from the world in different ways, cutting the infrastructure for diplomacy, whether it's at the State Department, USAID, or other agencies. So it does make it difficult, pulling away development dollars from programs in different countries. So it's created, I think, an exuberance among the Chinese to then go try to fill those gaps.
Sure.
And that Belt and Road Initiative, obviously that's been going on for a while, but I see them accelerating their plans for world engagement, really trying to fill a void that they think that we have now created. That said, there are still amazing opportunities for the United States. We have incredible relationships still in Asia, although there is a question just about every time we meet with leaders, diplomats from Asia, their question continues to be whether the United States is still reliable. Whether the United States policy is going to change now from administration to administration. Is it going to change every 4 years?
Is that what China wants?
I think it would, yeah. I mean, it's a big opportunity for them if they can not only add to their development work, for example, They try to continue developing out militarily, whether it's in the South China Sea or getting base agreements with different countries around the world. But they still have tensions with nations in Southeast Asia, for example, who also question whether it's in their long-term interest to be more reliant on China as an economic partner. There are tensions with India, for example, even tensions with Russia. And so, so China is coming on strong, but they've still got a lot of work to do in terms of their relationships with partners in Asia. And I think that for us is what still makes us, I think, essential for a lot of the nations in Asia. The thing is, we've got to be willing to step up and continue our engagement and not pull back, because if the world assesses two things, number one, that we've withdrawn to a certain point, and I can't tell you perfectly what that line is, right, but if there is this consensus that develops in Asia and around the world that you have kind of withdrawn, and that verdict becomes the prevailing wisdom. And secondly, if they assess that the United States has become too heavy-handed, has used its economic leverage too much, you see it happening already, and I alluded to it. What's going on is the world is starting to work around you. They are starting to build relationships and partnerships and trading relationships around you, so you could find yourself in 4 years or in 8 years in a situation where even though you try to come back, you don't have the same welcoming arms of countries around the world who either need you in the same way or welcome you in the same way. And that's my big concern, in the foreseeable future.
Fascinating. I think about that a lot, actually, as I travel across the state of Texas and talk to leaders who work internationally and work across borders. That is something that's on everybody's mind, is does the world see us as crucial anymore in some places? So thank you for that. Admiral, the region's security does, as the Congressman said, depend on our development and diplomacy initiatives, U.S. partnerships that extend beyond hard power, which you've talked to about a little bit here too, as well. From your perspective, how do U.S. civilian investments with allies like South Korea and Japan, as we were talking about a moment ago, complement our defense? If you have any further thoughts on that.
Sure. I echo everything the Congressman spoke about with China. I'll give you my own opinion in terms of what they're doing. This has been a steady march with China to recover from the century of humiliation that ended in 1949. And they are hell-bent on righting the wrongs that they feel that they suffered during that century. And they've been systematically progressing at a pace that in the last few years has been very alarming. I can't overstate the importance of the first island chain in terms of the islands of Philippines, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea. And our investment in those 4 countries is critical for the future of our country. And I'm not just talking military investments here. I'm talking about forging those relationships and sustaining those relationships that will help us hopefully deter any aggression from Japan. If we retreat from the first island chain, we're game over. People are very familiar with the bases that we've now built in the Philippines and all the missile defense stuff actually that we've worked with Japan and South Korea and the troops that we have deployed there as well. But this has been an insatiable march towards restoration in terms of China trying to right, in their view, the wrongs. And I also think that the whole semiconductor piece of this is kind of the oil of the Middle East, right? And that's why you see the CHIPS Act, which was passed, and the focus of this government to get a semiconductor capability stood up here in the U.S. when 90% of the really super high-end semiconductors are manufactured in Taiwan. So think of Taiwan as the new sort of Middle East, or the rejuvenated Middle East here in terms of the preciousness of that resource and the bottlenecks that could be, that in China's view are created around the island of Taiwan for open access to the sea. So our diplomatic relationships with those countries that form the first island chain are paramount, and if we retreat from those, it would be a grave mistake. And China is not going to stop, and the way that we contain them is through those relationships and the civilian relationships and the military to back it up.
Thank you. Ambassador Moreno, you have extensive experience as an ambassador and as a career diplomat here in the Western Hemisphere. How have you seen China make inroads in our own neighborhood here, and where can the U.S. effectively push back against this malign influence using tools like the State Department and others?
Yeah, if I could come back to that, but
Please.
I'd like to address something that Congressman Castro said in his remarks, and that's about Russia.
We'll get to Russia, trust me.
I joined the Foreign Service in 1983, which was kind of the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union, but it was still, the Cold War was still a pretty big deal. And I served in 10 different countries in Latin America, the Caribbean, the Middle East, Europe, Central America. And you know what from 1983 to 2017, you know what I had in common in every single one of those posts? Soviet Union and in Russia's malign influence, malign operations against our national security, our national interests, the stability of our neighbors and our friends. And we see to this day, yes, Ukraine, I mean, I'm really completely bewildered by our current policy in Ukraine right now. But look at Venezuela, right here in our backyard, completely propped up by Vladimir Putin. All over, the Iranians propped up. I mean, North Korea, they've got North Koreans fighting in a war in Europe. And yet that's not a blazing headline that's got everyone's hair on fire. It isn't. So I think that Russia will continue to be an extraordinary malign influence. You know, you talk about China. Even in Jamaica, where I last was, I would tell my guys, you know, every ambassador gets a letter from the president, you know, special instructions on what you're supposed to do. And one of them is, you know, protect American citizens, protect your staff, promote national interests, national security. Have American businesses compete on an even playing field, especially with the Chinese. And I would tell my guys, you know, we can't play like they do. I cannot take a suitcase full of cash and go see the Minister of Transportation and say, hey, please give this American company this contract. I can't do that for a lot of reasons. They're diplomats. We call them alpha wolf diplomats. They used to be very traditional, very old-fashioned. Now they're young guys who are very, very aggressive. What they're doing, for instance, in Latin America, they have spent on the Belt Initiative $125 billion just this year, since the beginning of this year. I mean, that's mind-boggling. Especially Africa and Asia, a lot less actually in Latin America, but they're trying. Believe me, I think the administration did a very good thing. Not the way they did it, but the result they got in the Panama Canal. Panamanians canceled 2 port contracts and rebid them. And that was a good thing because Chinese owned the Cologne Free Zone. They're trying to make inroads into our traditional ally, Colombia, who is oldest democracy in Latin America. They're building up port facilities in Buenaventura. They're trying to do a railroad from the Atlantic to the Pacific coast. So they are nonstop, and we are not catching up, and we are retreating. We're taking out our assistance programs. In Colombia, we're in the judicial sector, hospitals, schools, crop substitution, economic development, all that is gone. And who's going to fill that vacuum?
Right.
So who is a guy like Gustavo Petro, who a lot of people have problems, who's he going to turn to? He's going to turn to the Chinese. And we keep seeing that over and over again. I'm not an expert on the East Asia Pacific like the Admiral, but it really is, we really have to wake up.
You know, I just want to add one thing on China. You know, historically, at least over the last, as they've been emerging over the last 15, 20 years, to me, they were offering a very autocratic model that promised foreign leaders no accountability for how they treat their own people or how they treat their neighbors. China's support, their money, often came with no strings attached. Whereas in the United States, we're trying to encourage a democracy. People get to vote, they get to pick their leaders and so forth. And those were the two kind of competing models. But quite honestly, I'm worried about what our country is selling across the world now. with this administration and the message that it's sending to leaders. I felt during the first Trump administration that you started to see some leaders abuse their people more because they felt like nobody was watching for human rights violations in the same way. And so you have world leaders that become more abusive of their people. And I think that is a danger. The other part with China is just the intense competition on emerging technologies. So much of our competition with China is driven by advancements in technology that first are seen, I think, through a defense perspective and an intelligence perspective, and then shortly behind that through a commercial lens. But that competition will have profound.
Absolutely.
I mean, every time I go into an intelligence meeting, just about, there is some discussion on some aspect of the competition with China. That's how profound it is.
I would just add, if I can, Congressman, unclassified.
We could talk
Yeah.
about this
Yeah,
for
yeah.
a long time. I have
Just-
more I want to get to, but please.
Just real
sir.
quick, there's 4 platforms, and there's more than 4 that come to mind in terms of platforms that look exactly like the systems that we have fielded in DoD. They have a joint strike fighter that looks like ours. They have an aircraft carrier that just went to sea in the last year or two that looks a lot like our Ford-class carrier, and then the Predator and Reaper drones are identical. And this theft of our intellectual property has gone on for far too long.
Well, let's go ahead and move on. I know we can talk about this more and more, but I do want to talk a little bit about Russia. Each day that Russia continues its invasion of Ukraine threatens not only the security of innocent Ukrainians, but also that of our European allies and the United States. U.S. security and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine has been instrumental in countering these advances. Congressman, you've been a longtime supporter of Ukraine, saying in February that they have rightly earned the support of much of the free world. Your district in San Antonio is home to a large Ukrainian community, including many who have fled the war.
Yeah.
So tell us about it. Why should we continue to back Ukrainians in their fight against tyranny, as if it's a hard question to answer?
No, I mean, look, no, but that's a good question. And listen, if you look at some of the polls, and of course a lot of the political messaging, there is a lot of political messaging that says, hey, we've spent enough money on Ukraine and on this war, and we should just let Europe worry about it, or really bring the sides to the table and allow Ukraine to essentially surrender to Russia and give them a big part of the country. But I believe that the stakes, not just for Ukraine and for Europe and for the world, are so tremendous that we have to continue to support their effort as long as they are willing to continue to fight. After World War II, the world made a real effort to stop nations from invading other nations. That record in terms of it not happening has not been perfect, but the world came together, particularly the United States and Europe, to try to set a framework for how other nations deal with each other. You have the UN and so forth, all of these peacekeeping institutions and systems. Well, Russia twice over a decade ignored that and invaded a nation and took part of its territory. We understand that Vladimir Putin still has in his mind the idea that he wants to reunify the old Soviet Union. If you ask me, what do we have to come out of this with, this war? One thing is that Vladimir Putin and Russian leaders have to understand that they're not going to reunify the old Soviet Union.
Yeah.
By force, by killing people in countries, by taking territory. And so I still think that there's a lot of support that we need to lend in that effort. And I think it's dangerous if Russia believes that, hey, we invaded Ukraine, and then a few years later, the American president negotiated so that we get to keep a big chunk of that land. Well, should we think about doing that in Latvia or Estonia or Lithuania or somewhere else? And then other countries around the world, including China, that has its eyes set on Taiwan, what do they take from all of this in terms of their own ambitions? Look, obviously I hope that they don't take any action towards Taiwan. but you have to think about what the incentives are for nations around the world if they feel like the handcuffs are off, so to speak, that we're no longer following these international laws, rules, and order, and they can become more violent and vicious with other nations.
Would you like to see security guarantees?
I do think that there should be some security guarantees. I think that Europe does have to play a big role in that. As big as the stakes are for the United States, I think the stakes are even larger for Europe. I think they understand that in recently making what I would describe as a middle term or medium term commitment in terms of arms and weapons to Ukraine. So their commitment does have to be rock solid. If President Trump said Europe should even lead this effort, then I think that that's absolutely plausible in terms of allowing Europe to take the lead on it. But the United States also has an important role to play in that security guarantee in terms of what we supply to Ukraine.
Absolutely. Now, Admiral, you've worked to strengthen European security by partnering with countries like Romania and Poland to install missile defense systems. Can you speak on that, especially in this moment of aggression from Russia?
Sure. The systems that we installed in Romania and Poland, I think, are good examples of what I think could be expanded into other defensive systems in Eastern Europe. This was all under President Obama. It was called the European Phased Adaptive Approach, and it involved building a missile defense site and base in Romania, the third world country part of Romania. And the reason we did it was because we were very concerned about Iran. And we put a site in Romania and we put a site in Poland. The site in Poland is 100 miles from Kaliningrad, and the Russians hated it. I remember being summoned to Switzerland to talk to Lavrov and his group and told them that it's no threat against your ICBMs, and they kind of shook their head and they said, I don't believe a word you're saying. So the projection of strength in Eastern Europe with those sites, and they're U.S. sites, they're flagged U.S. sites, I think sends a strong message. The other part of this, I think, in terms of what we did with bringing Finland into NATO with 800 miles of coastline against Russia, the more we can expand that, in my view, the better. And a strong NATO really, really is to the benefit of the United States. And I'm glad that the other countries are now investing much more. I think that even more needs to be done. And if we can, get NATO to even beyond where it is today and look at potential defensive systems as we need for the regional conflict in Europe, I think that that's the future of where we need to be to, if there's such a word, to contain any further Russian aggression. But they're not going to stop at Ukraine. Yeah. And I think the more we can do in the Eastern European theater would be prudent.
Well, I'm going to kind of hope it doesn't feel rushed, but rush us along here. I want to make sure that we get a good breadth of questions in and questions from our audience. So a little bit more rapid fire here. Congressman, how can the U.S. reestablish itself as a reliable partner, including with Mexico, economically, to regain influence in international trade, promote regional cooperation, and bolster our economic security alongside our national security?
Well, to be politically polite, we have to take a different direction. Sure. I mean, even if it's within this administration, Mexico and Canada are two of our largest trading partners, and the relationship has soured very much over the past 6 months. And again, the long-term effect of that, the long-term threat to the United States, is that economically they don't rely on the United States as much. And so, to be clear, that means less jobs for us here in San Antonio, less jobs in Texas ultimately. And so we need to take a different tack. Let me give you one example.
Please.
There has been a lot of talk about essentially taking military action in Mexico. In fact, I warned in the Foreign Affairs Committee last year that there were last term I should say, series of pieces of legislation that had been introduced in the Congress to lay the foundation essentially for a war with Mexico. And we've seen some of those accelerate now. And so it would be dangerous. It would be devastating, I think, to both nations, but especially to Texans, to the Texas economy. And so right now, I think, I would hope that we prevent any kind of further damage. And then I think that we just have to hope that we get through what I would consider a harsh period right now, and that relationship is still healthy and good, but can also be, brought to an even greater place.
Absolutely. Our relationship with Mexico is crucial and something that's on the mind of Texans all over the state and here in San Antonio. Quickly, let's talk about resources and reform, which you've done a lot of work on over your congressional career. Since the beginning of the new administration, thousands of international assistance programs across all sectors have faced freezes, terminations, and major funding cuts, including the recent July rescissions package that cut about $8 billion in international assistance that could otherwise have gone to advancing U.S. interests and had already been approved by Congress to do so.
Yeah.
Congressman, can you talk about how these cuts have affected your constituents here in San Antonio and Texas, how that could play out? And then why is it so important for Congress to remain involved in the funding conversation and on our resources and reform?
Well, I'll give you a very direct example. I met yesterday with about a dozen USAID officers who lost their jobs, who are now back in San Antonio. These were people that had jobs at USAID and lost their jobs because of what's happened, and they're San Antonians. And so there's a very direct impact to the community. In fact, as we were talking, they said, hey, basically, you can imagine the workforce has now, with everybody, a lot of folks losing their jobs like this, the workforce has been flooded with people competing oftentimes for the same type of jobs. So for them, some of them are starting to struggle financially. And so I also don't think that it's been good for the world. As was mentioned earlier, some of the programs that were cut were programs to watch for Ebola, for example, to vaccinate folks, although some of those programs were also preserved. But some things that are life-saving, but also ensure that the United States and Americans remain safe. With diseases, for example, diseases don't have any borders.
No borders.
You're not talking about physical borders that you can install to keep things out, diseases out, in the same way that you can install things to keep people out. And so I think part of it is understanding that this is hurtful and harmful to us as well. And then on your point about Congress, I mentioned the point that I've been disappointed with my colleagues. I thought a lot about the Constitution, particularly over the last few months. And I feel as though the drafters of the Constitution assumed that each branch of government would stand up for itself, would stand up for its own territory within the rights that it's got in the Constitution. And right now, Majority Leader Thune and Speaker Johnson have been completely subsumed by the executive branch. The legislative branch, for all intents and purposes, is under the direction of Donald Trump. And I don't think that it's healthy in any time, whether you have a Democratic president or a Republican president, for the legislative branch to be this subservient to the executive branch. What legislative branch would let a president or a governor, once that legislature has appropriated money to something, billions and billions of dollars, let a president come along and say, no, you know what, we're not going to do that after all. Without any kind of, fight, with no stern words, with no criticism, nothing for that branch of government to stand up and say, that's not your territory, that's not your purview, this is our purview. And we're going to stand up constitutionally for the legislature's right. That has not happened. And I think that it's harmful, it's unhealthy, and ultimately I think it's dangerous as well.
I'm going to incorporate an audience question in here. Where do you see bipartisan opportunities to further reform U.S. assistance, especially now that the programs are under the State Department?
Yeah, a great question. We're going through a state reauthorization bill right now. In September, we're actually going to have a committee markup, which you all know is where we consider amendments and the base bill and so forth. I think that will hopefully be an opportunity in a bipartisan way to accomplish some reforms. Look, there's no question, there are reforms that are healthy, that are good. I've talked about, well, how do we end up rebuilding in the later years USAID. Whatever that is, it's not going to look exactly like it was before, right? It's not going to be a copycat of what it was before. But for me, the state reauthorization presents an immediate opportunity for us to get together on some of these programs and figure out how we can still be very beneficial to the world, and I think therefore to Americans.
Very important. Thank you for that question. Here's another audience question. What impacts do y'all foresee that the inclusion of U.S. companies, like I did some examples here, Intel and NVIDIA, could have on U.S. diplomacy and the world economy? Let's talk a little bit about the public sector here, or the public and private partnerships and things like that. Any thoughts from our panel?
Please.
Well, I think that we have done a lot of things, and one of the things that we're not doing is we're not taking advantage of some of the built-in biases in our favor. For American businesses, I mentioned about not being able to take a suitcase full of cash. A lot of these people that we deal with, they don't want to do that. They really would prefer to go to American companies. They really want to deal with us and partner with us. That's why we have the development bank. That's why we have so many initiatives. For instance, on the military side, I'm sorry to stray into your lane here. You know, I've worked with the Security Force Advisory Brigade, U.S. Army. These are young men and women who go overseas, and they're going to try to, they're real U.S. ambassadors, not guys who have the title on it. And they want to sell military doctrine. They want to sell U.S. equipment. They want to sell the U.S. view of things. And you know what? Throughout, I'm talking about Latin America. I can't say so much about East Asia, et cetera. They want to do that. The people in Jamaica, for instance, you know, we were constantly fighting the Chinese on offering military training to the Jamaican Defense Forces. And I'd speak to the soldiers in the offices and say, we don't want them. We don't want their systems, weapon systems. We don't want to go to China. Talk to guys who went to China that had a miserable time. We want to be with you guys. And so we have all these built-in advantages that we're just kind of throwing away now, you know? And we're not following a process, and we're throwing away expertise, as you saw with those USAID guys. You know, they cut the global management office that has the Voice of America and all these other things. They fired like 85%. And then we had the dust-off with Iran, and we had no way to communicate to the Iranian people, you know, what our positions was, what the truth was, what the unbiased, unvarnished facts were. Because all the guys who spoke Farsi were gone. They'd been fired. And they had to go find them and bring them back. And there's just no process. The Russian summit wasn't done the traditional way. It was done by tweet. We're doing diplomacy by tweet now, instead of doing papers, position papers, having deputies meetings, having principals meetings, having the president briefed, having decisions being made. All that's gone out the window. It's all now impromptu, seat of the pants stuff. And believe me, I'm telling you, that's going to result in some really disastrous stuff along the line.
Let's bring in a question here on global health. Infectious diseases pose a serious threat, not just in the US, but globally. The world's flagship global health initiatives, we've talked about several here, Global Fund, PEPFAR, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, have all been at risk of losing their US funding, undermining the life-saving work that they do and endangering millions. How do these international health initiatives both advance our interests abroad and protect us here, and what can continue to be done in Congress, Congressman?
Well, I mean, thankfully, many of those have been preserved. You know, PEPFAR has been a lifesaver for literally millions and millions of people in Africa. But beyond, I would say beyond that, but that is the most important thing, is the substance of it. You're saving people's lives.
Absolutely.
But the goodwill that the United States gains from the fact that we're able to do that incredible work, it's immeasurable. You know, you talk about how other people around the world see the United States. When they know that you're committed to those kinds of programs that are helping to save people's lives in their country, you can't measure that. And really, it also spreads over to, even on the commercial end, how they look at your businesses, how they look at engaging your commercial sector, all of it. And so it's incredibly beneficial to us. And, but I was struck yesterday as I was meeting with the USAID folks, they mentioned the prohibition of USAID not being able to essentially market or advertise about their international work and all of the good things that they have been able to accomplish. And really, I think, Americans, because people are going about their daily lives and enmeshed in domestic issues, but I think that we don't necessarily grasp how profound a lot of that work is to the people that are being served and the people's lives that are being saved, and how grateful they are to the United States for that.
Not to mention the retreat of those resources and
Oh,
what
that's
it
right,
says to
yeah.
those that relied on the U.S. to be there.
And
Ambassador.
also, on international forum, we need support in the UN for initiatives that we think appropriate. We need we need votes in the OAS. We need support in CARICOM. We need support for what we're trying to do to Haiti. Right now, we are struggling to get people to join some kind of international stabilization force in Haiti. And there's some initiatives, perhaps the OAS. But if we take away all the support we're giving to countries and it's filled by China and other people, they're not going to vote with us anymore. They're not going to support our initiatives. And every time the Haiti initiative gets sent to the Security Council, it's the Chinese and the Russians who crash it for us. Although the Russians were a little bit better behaved yesterday, from what I understand. I don't understand why. But this is another important aspect. We need international support in places like the UN and other international organizations, and we're just throwing it away.
And it's going to get harder to get that. I mean, over the last several years, I've made calls to different diplomats from around the world asking for their support on different things at the UN. Or as we had candidates that the United States was supporting for posts at the UN, I would call the embassies and ask them for support. And you can tell when many of the countries, you call them and they kind of light up because they have a positive feeling towards the United States. Not everybody, but a lot of them. And on many of those things, they vote with us. They are voting with us. So as you retreat from the world, it becomes harder to convince those folks at the United Nations and other international bodies to support the United States position.
Yeah. I have one more audience question that I'm going to kind of combine together, and then I'll ask my closing. This is an incredibly thoughtful question. How does everyone in the room expand the conversation we're having here today with our networks, communities, and fellow citizens? Well, first, sign up for our email list and stay in touch with me. Let's have a call. Second, get involved with the World Affairs Council. They do amazing work here when USGLC is not in town. And then also, I'd love to get y'all's perspective on how we can continue this. And then how might our local institutions better prepare students to be global citizens, whether that's they're thinking about joining the military and getting involved in that way, or maybe down the line would like to join the foreign service or serve their community in some way. How can we continue to expand them thinking globally? Admiral, let's start with you on any of those.
Sure. I think that there's several, I'll be quick.
Please.
In terms of answers to that question is that, and I hate to do this to you, Congressman, but talk to your congressman. and I'm in D.C. a ton, and the people walking the halls of the Dirksen office building, all the office buildings, that's how you influence change here, is that you, through your elected officials, and it's not just at the national level, it is absolutely through, local leadership as well. You can't shy away from it. I have, fingers crossed, a son graduating from A&M in political science. In hopefully May, fingers crossed. And he has really wrestled with, what do I do? And he really wanted to go work for the CIA or the FBI and go into federal service, and is told they're not hiring. So, there's really a paralysis, I think, when you have a young kid who wants to go serve and, doesn't want to go make a ton of money. He wants to serve the country. So, I'm a Navy guy, my wife's Navy too. He's going to probably go into the Air Force and fly for the Air Force. But to me, that's just a good example of, here you got a student, great student, coming out with political science degree, perfect for federal government service, and is told we're not hiring. So
I had that same thing happen to me when I graduated. It was a hiring freeze. I'm grateful to end up where I ended up, absolutely. But no, it's a challenge.
The last thing I'll say is don't be afraid to talk to, and you all know there's military in here, you all have military neighbors. Don't be afraid to talk to them about your policy issues and what you're feeling as a citizen, because that's who we protect, right? We serve the American people. And I think that I always appreciated when an ordinary citizen on an airplane would lean over to me and say, what do you do? And I would tell them I'm in charge of missile defense. And the question always went to, well, am I protected?
Yeah.
So don't shy away from testing the military and continuing to voice your opinion. That's what makes us a great democracy and a great country.
Absolutely.
It's the voice of the people.
Well, I'll ask my final question here. At a time when Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the rise of China, and ongoing humanitarian crises in places like Sudan, Syria, and Haiti dominate global headlines, we're reminded today and every day how interconnected our lives are with the rest of the world. American international leadership and cost-effective investments in diplomacy and development alongside defense can help build a better world and a stronger America. We've talked about that all today. For each of you, how do you see America's strategy around the world benefiting Texas's security and growth? How does it help San Antonio in particular win? What's it worth for this community? Congressman, start with you.
I mentioned in my remarks that I see us as an international city. You remember, for example, that NAFTA was signed here in the 1990s. A large basis of San Antonio's economy and Texas's economy is based around international trade, particularly with Mexico. So, when I say that it means the world to us, more than any other state in the nation, it means the world to us. And engaging with the world makes us stronger, not weaker. And that's been true for years, and it'll continue to be true. And I hope that we can re-engage the world in many ways in the years to come. And I hope that you all will choose to be a part of that.
Yes, thank you very much.
I'll be quick. The biggest thing I see in terms of our power projection around the world is not just what we do as the U.S., but what our allies do with our help. And a lot of the foreign military sales, direct commercial sales, foreign military financing dollars that get appropriated by Congress are spent in the U.S. And we're doing ourselves a favor by allowing our technology to go into our allies and in many cases paid for by them, bringing jobs and revenue into the state of Texas. I can assure you that the list is long in terms of sub-tier suppliers into the defense systems, into the prime contractors as well up in Dallas, which you're all familiar with. But I think that strengthening our allies and not just on the U.S. side is going to pay great dividends to the state of Texas.
Ambassador.
Yeah, well, every once in a while you hear people saying, oh, we should shut down the border. This is in the previous administration, that, it's out of control, blah, blah. If you shut down the border completely, as the governor once tried to do, you realize that you're cutting off $1.7 billion of bilateral trade with Mexico every single day. Add that up, it's unbelievable. So you just can't close the border. You have to do things in a measured way where that's going to affect it. As far as our perception here, I'm glad you brought up the FMF, because there are companies here in San Antonio, defense-oriented companies. All this aid to Ukraine, and there have been a lot of numbers thrown around, the vast majority of the aid, military aid, is foreign military funding. What does that mean? That doesn't mean we give them cash that Zelensky takes and goes buy a chateau in southern France. No. It's they contract American defense contractors and pay them to make stuff for them and send it to them, creating an enormous amount of jobs, an enormous amount of income, and also helps us develop our own things. Or else we give them the old stuff and then they develop new stuff for us. So that's something that San Antonio's been definitely. Look, San Antonio has the International Air Force Academy. The influence of that place, anyone here from there? Well, tremendous place. I mean, that shows you what America can do, and the way all these air forces in Latin America and Colombian National Police Air Service and people like that have trained, and they form bonds and friendships, and they look at the U.S. in a certain way. And we have all those advantages that I talked about. You know, I would just beg you to speak to your neighbors, to encourage conversation, encourage dialogue. I hate to say it, I'll slap myself after saying it, get active on social media, but educate yourself first. Don't just blindly follow any.
Someone had to say it. I'm glad you did.
No, that's why you have to. That's why you have to encourage your students. You have to encourage your neighbors. You know, do your research. Don't just believe Russian bought-for bots putting out ridiculous stuff that has become now, you know, the rule rather than the exception. So encourage, and students are so crucial, so crucial. Work with your kids, work with your students, work with people. I mentor a bunch of people who were interested in the Foreign Service, and I got to tell you, all that has stopped. They're also demoralized and upset. There's nowhere for them to go now. There's nowhere for people who, like you said, they wanted to serve their country. They were proud to serve the country, and those opportunities are going away. So I think we're located in a great place. I'm so happy I moved here. I relocated here to San Antonio. I'm very proud, and very proud to be part of all this with you guys.
Well said. Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause to our panel. Now, before I let y'all go, please stay seated. I would, one more time, like to thank our Texas Advisory Committee members who are here with us today, and a couple of wonderful community partners that we worked with, the Hispanic Chamber, the Greater Chamber of San Antonio, the San Antonio Council for International Visitors, and of course the World Affairs Council. So thank you all for joining us. And one more time, let's thank Congressman Castro for his insights today and for serving us so well in Congress. You know, the absolute best part of my job is working with leaders like all of you, and I don't say that lightly. I mean, you just heard why America's global leadership matters to San Antonio. It's not a sideline issue, it belongs to all of us. You are part of an important group of people around the country who have the ability to make a true impact. And on that note, if you're new to the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition's network, maybe you got a cold email from me today, as I mentioned earlier, to come join us, please make sure you opt into updates from us about mobilizations, news, and future events we're holding, not just here in San Antonio, but across the state. And so I'll send an email after this with a link for you to be able to sign up and get more information. And lastly, and most importantly, as the ambassador said, please continue to share what you've learned today with your networks, your friends, your family. Don't let today's conversation be the last one you have about America's role in the world. It belongs to all of us, not just your congressman. Because of you, we can continue to build a better world and a safer, stronger, and more prosperous America. Thank you all for joining us today, and see y'all very soon. Thank you.
Wonderful. Enjoyed it.